welcome to a special Super Tuesday edition of Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Chadello. This is a huge day in the race for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Okay, that's about right.
Antony Green.
Oh, you're here.
Why are you here?
There's an election on. The ABC flashed the official Antony Green sign on the sky. I'm here to do the election.
Thanks, Antony. We'll get back to you later. And Super Tuesday has made Joe Biden the comeback kid today, or at least the comeback senior citizen.
We are better than this president. So get back up and take back this country, the United States of America. There's not a single thing we can't do.
The former VP has won the majority of Super Tuesday states, while Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has claimed the biggest prize of all, that of California.
But we're going to win because the people understand it is our campaign, our movement, which is best positioned to defeat Trump.
And here's how it played out across the map. Biden won in Alabama, Arkansas, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. Sanders claimed California, Colorado, Utah, and Vermont. Mike Bloomberg picked up American Samoa. Maine remains too close to call, Chaz.
Yeah, and these results are even worse than they seem for Sanders, to be honest, because most of these states had early voting for ages while Sanders was riding high and Biden was on the nose. Look at this timetable. Minnesota started voting on January 17, then through to California on February 3, Texas on February 18. That's 9 states voting before Biden even began his comeback in Nevada. And 12 states started voting before the South Carolina primary really kicked Biden into gear. So Sanders would have banked a lot of votes during that time. You want to know how many votes?
Yes.
If you compare who late deciders voted for versus early deciders, Biden went 28 points better amongst late deciders in Minnesota, 27 points better in Tennessee, 26 points better in Maine, 22 points better in California, and so on. Whereas for Sanders, he did 24 points worse amongst late deciders than early deciders in Minnesota, and 32 points worse in Maine, 16 points worse in Texas, and so on. He did worse in every single state amongst late deciders. CNN's exit poll said 49% of late deciders favoured Biden compared to 20% favouring Sanders. So without early voting, this could have been so much worse for Sanders.
Yeah, indeed. Well, at the risk of upsetting Antony Green, I'm going to skip through them state by state. A huge win for Biden in Alabama, approaching a 50-point margin today. American Samoa, the one small bright spot for Mike Bloomberg. Biden was very strong as well in Arkansas, almost 2-1 there over Bernie Sanders. California, though, with its 415 delegate haul, has gone to Bernie Sanders. We'll see just how much he can run up the score there in the next few days. Right now, Joe Biden is within about 10 points. Bloomberg, though, is slipping down, maybe out of that 15% viability threshold, Chaz.
And we really need to caution people not to jump to conclusions with these numbers in California, because they could change a lot. It takes days, if not weeks, to count California's millions of mail-in votes, and Sanders could well end up doing a lot better. Back in 2016, for instance, at the end of the first day of counting, Clinton led Sanders in California by 21.5. At the end of the process, she won by only 7. But it is unlikely that mail-in votes are going to help a latecomer like Bloomberg. And as you say, he seems to have really failed there. Bloomberg sunk a huge amount of money in California, not just in advertising, but also in setting up a ground game. Bloomberg actually had the most field officers out of anybody, 25 of them, compared to only 1 for Joe Biden. And yet, as you say, he could well drop below that magic 15% barrier by the time the mail-in votes are counted at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can be counted through until Friday. They don't have to be postmarked until midnight on Super Tuesday in the United States. Well, as for Colorado, they went for Bernie Sanders as well ahead of Joe Biden. Bloomberg close behind, also picking up a handful of delegates. Maine is the real squeaker at this hour. Biden leads by around 1,300 votes, but that was tipped to be an easy win for Bernie Sanders, so that was a bit of an upset. Also, an upset, Massachusetts, a real shocker in fact. Biden winning in a canter. Elizabeth Warren has been forced into 3rd place in her home state. What that means for her candidacy will be fascinating to see in the days ahead. Minnesota, the other unexpected win for Joe Biden today. Perhaps riding on a wave of clo-mentum, he surged in a state that Bernie was also heavily favoured in.
Yeah, Biden was polling at 8% there last week. So thanks, Amy.
Yeah, North Carolina again showed Joe Biden's southern strength. Nearly 20 points clear in another state where Bernie Sanders had made a bit of a play. Oklahoma was on Mike Bloomberg's radar, but Biden won it by more than 10 points over Bernie Sanders. Tennessee also went for Biden. And now to the Lone Star State. This probably clinched it for Joe Biden. Texas was close for a long time throughout the count. Bernie was in front for quite a while, but then Biden broke away for what is shaping up to be a crucial win for him, one that may in fact dominate the narrative out of Super Tuesday.
Yeah, well, Sanders really pushed hard in this state. So it's interesting because one of Sanders' key demographics is Hispanics, and 31% of Texas primary voters are Hispanic. Well, Sanders delivered with 39% of the Hispanic vote today, although Biden did put in a respectable effort there with 26%. You might be wondering how Biden won then. Well, 20% of Texas primary voters are black, and Biden owns that demographic. He won Texas black voters today 58% to 15%, which is basically the same margins he won black voters by in South Carolina on the weekend. Sanders is going to be disappointed with that. Texas is not like South Carolina, and if Biden's still putting Sanders away there with black voters, then this is developing the air of 2016 all over again, John, where Clinton basically won on the back of black voters.
Yeah, it's very much a case of here we go again for Bernie Sanders. Utah was an easy win for Bernie with a three-way split for second place there. Sanders has won his home state of Vermont by almost 30 points. But again, in Virginia, with its haul of 99 delegates, it has swung heavily behind Joe Biden. A solid South for Biden. 30 points the margin in a state where both Bloomberg and Bernie were hopeful of an upset.
Yeah, look, it's still too early to know who's going to be ahead in delegates after all the votes are counted this week. We do know Bloomberg is in real trouble. Spent $505 million in advertising, a lot of it on Super Tuesday. By contrast, Biden didn't even start buying ads until last week, eventually seeing on $2.2 million. Bloomberg outspent him 60-1, and he still got done.
Can't buy me love, and maybe by this time tomorrow, Mike will be out of the race.
You make me feel like dancing.
We're going to do some dancing. Our revolution includes dancing.
Dancing. We're gonna dance the night away. You make me feel like dancing. I feel like dancing, dancing, dance the night away. I feel like dancing, dancing, dance the night away. I feel like dancing, dancing, dance the night away. I feel like dancing, dancing.
We understood that all good. We gotta know it's giving love to the world. He's walking on the road. Yeah, look at you a chick, yeah, on the beat. Yeah, you can't even want a bitch. Ain't nothing, yeah. I've been rolling with the money.
The stage was set for Super Tuesday by the weekend primary in South Carolina. After 3 losses in a row, it was do or die for Vice President Joe Biden. And in the end, he did win, that is, by almost 30 points in the final tally. Better than many Biden backers had dared to dream after a wobbly old start. And Biden took aim at his main rival, Bernie Sanders.
Talk is cheap. False promises are deceptive. And talk about revolution and changing anyone's life. We need real changes right now.
Biden's big win saw him jump into second place in the delegate count, and he overtook Bernie in the popular vote. Before South Carolina, Bernie was miles ahead, over 100,000 votes. That was turned on its head, setting up this week's big comeback story.
And there's no better illustration of the difference that win made than this, John. The South Carolina primary was on the last day of February, a month when the main players raised this much money. You can see Biden well back there on $18 million. Well, fast forward 2 more days, and Biden is telling people that since the beginning of February, he'd raised $33 million. $15 million in 2 days. That's quite the turnaround.
That's about how much Mike Bloomberg would have made himself in that time. And the South Carolina primary certainly helped to winnow the Democratic field. So let's dust off our favourite game.
Guess who won't be president?
And first to go this week, it was billionaire businessman Tom Steyer. There goes the former hedge fund owner. He ploughed $267 million of his own loot into this presidential campaign. Most of it was funneled into South Carolina. He dropped out after winning just under 60,000 votes last weekend. In total, Steyer spent over $1,700 per vote in these primaries. Also bowing out after finishing 4th in South Carolina, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. So long, Pete. After winning the Iowa caucuses in that muddled result and coming second to Sanders in New Hampshire, Buttigieg couldn't win over significant Latino or black support in Nevada or South Carolina, and he pulled the pin after a chat on Sunday with former President Jimmy Carter. Wonder what he said. And then Pete announced that he'd be supporting a former rival.
I'm delighted to endorse and support Joe Biden for president.
Buttigieg was in 3rd place among pledged delegates when he ended his campaign.
Yeah, he's clearly a very intelligent guy, John, and he probably did better than anyone expected he would. But he sometimes failed to inspire, and I'm not sure why, given some of the incredibly inspirational moves that he showcased.
Go kids, we've got this!
Oh, you'd run through brick walls for that man, wouldn't you?
Is he really gay at dancing? I don't know.
Just look how revved up his crowds got for him.
So can I look to you to spread that sense of hope to those that you know? Come on.
It is a frenzy of excitement, John.
Ooh, well, next out the door, another excitement machine. Amy Klobuchar. There goes the Minnesota senator ending her campaign, which peaked with a 3rd place showing in New Hampshire. But like Pete, she couldn't see a path to the nomination once Joe Biden found his feet in South Carolina last weekend.
Today, I am ending my campaign and endorsing Joe Biden for president.
Like Mayor Pete, Klobuchar also struggled to win over black and Latino voters, although she did try to relate to them.
My name is Amy, and when I took Spanish in 4th grade, my name was Elena. They gave me the name me llamo Elena because I couldn't roll my R's very, very well.
And look how impressed this lady was with Klobuchar's outreach. I think I know why she only got 4% of the Latino vote in Nevada, John.
Lucky to get 4%. Not huge support, but still. 2 very significant endorsements came this week from Klobuchar and Pete. Another one, of course, for Joe Biden's hopes to win in Texas came from another former presidential contender, Beto O'Rourke. He also stepped up.
We need somebody who can reestablish the moral authority of the United States. We need somebody who will fight for democracy here and abroad, because democracy is under attack here and abroad. We need Joe Biden.
I missed the Beto point. The point was so good.
Go Beto! Yeah. Look, the Empire certainly struck back yesterday for Bernie Sanders. There were also Biden endorsements from ex-Senate leader Harry Reid and Obama confidant Susan Rice. But we shouldn't assume that Buttigieg and Klobuchar endorsements will necessarily mean that their supporters will go directly to Biden. For instance, Morning Consult had an interesting poll last week of the second preferences for Buttigieg supporters, and they were quite evenly divided, with Bernie Sanders actually taking the largest share. So I guess we'll see over the next few weeks how much of that support has actually gone to Biden.
Yeah, but we can't let one of the more forgettable candidates go this week without farewelling probably the only memorable thing about him.
Farewell to Tom Steyer's tie. Tom Steyer's tie made it further than anyone predicted. From Iowa to New Hampshire and Nevada, before finally coming to an end in South Carolina. People said a tartan tie couldn't make it to the White House. And they were right. So let's pour one out for Tom Steyer's tie.
Well, it looks like we've got a contest on our hands, and that means Biden is about to go under the microscope again, which is a challenge for Biden because he's not exactly the perfect specimen.
I'm the guy that came back after meeting with Deng Xiaoping. My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over if you like what you see. Help out. If not, vote for the other by carnage on our streets. 150 million people have been killed since 2007. By the way, this is my little sister, Valerie, and I'm Jill's husband. Oh, no, this guy.
Please come back in less than 13 years, sir.
All right, Chuck. Thank you very much.
All right. It's Chris, but anyway.
Trump put it in a somewhat uncharitable way.
Joe's not going to be running the government. He's just going to be sitting in a home someplace. and people are going to be running it for him.
But Biden's gaffe-tastic performances are a thing, especially when they involve from gaffe to flat-out fantasy, like this story a few weeks back.
30 years ago, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robbins Island.
But wait, Nelson Mandela also apparently came to Washington a few years later and threw his arms around Biden, saying, "I want to thank you because you tried to see me. You got arrested trying to see me." Now, Biden told that story 3 times when sucking up the black voters in South Carolina, and it's all very interesting, seeing as Soweto, where Biden was supposedly arrested, is almost 900 miles away from Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. Furthermore, Biden talked about his 1977 visit to South Africa publicly in 2013. He spoke about not getting to meet Nelson Mandela there, but strangely, he didn't mention getting arrested at the time. Oh, and the US ambassador to the UN in 1977, who Biden said he got arrested with, said he was never arrested and he doesn't think Biden was either. Well, after the press hounded the Biden campaign about this story for a week, Biden came out with this.
We landed in Johannesburg, and the Afrikaners took me off the plane, took me in one direction, wanted me to go through a white-only door, and in fact, I wouldn't move. I said everybody else is going through another door. I'm going with the black delegation that I came with. They said, "No, you can't." And I said, "Well, I'm standing here. I'm not going to move," and they would not let me move anywhere. So I guess I should have said I was detained. I was not able to move forward.
Right, so rather than being arrested in Soweto, he was actually mildly inconvenienced by airport security in Johannesburg. And as for Mandela's thanks for getting arrested...
Long after this, when Nelson Mandela was freed and came to the United States, he came to my office. He was one of the most incredible men I ever met. He sat down in my office, thanked me for trying to all the work I did on apartheid.
So that story's kind of changed a bit too. Biden might want to watch out for this kind of thing, because this race is swinging wildly and one of them could make it swing again.
We'll soon see how the final Super Tuesday results play out in the overall delegate count. But one thing is for sure, the odds are shortening that we're going to see a contested convention for the first time since the 1950s. In total, there are 3,979 pledged delegates at stake in all of these primaries and caucuses, starting back in Iowa on February 3rd, right through until the final Montana primary on June the 7th. That makes 1,991 the magic number to win the Democratic presidential nomination on the first ballot at the convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in July.
Who's going to win those delegates, though, is anyone's guess. Number crunchers 538 are projecting that Bloomberg has about a 1% chance of winning the most delegates. But since South Carolina and those endorsements yesterday, Biden has turned a 30% deficit in his chances of winning the most delegates into a 30% lead, according to 538 at least. But here's the most important bit. As of today, 538 was predicting that there's a 61% chance that the Democrats will go to the convention with no one having won a majority of pledged delegates.
And that's when things will get really interesting. Enter the Superdelegates, also known as automatic delegates. There are 771 of them, 16% of all delegates. They are members of the US House of Representatives, the US Senate, state governors, other elected officials, as well as party elders, including former presidents and vice presidents. These superdelegates basically have one superpower. They can support whoever they like, any candidate they like, and they can change their mind whenever they like. They were created back in 1982 as a bit of an insurance policy to stop a potentially unelectable candidate taking the nomination. And in the minds of some moderates right now, that is exactly what Bernie Sanders is, and he is what superdelegates are designed to stop. Until this election, superdelegates also had the power to vote on the first ballot at the convention, although that has never actually been needed to decide the nominee. But in 2020, they can only vote on the second or any subsequent ballots, making the new magic number 2,382 to win.
But that hasn't stopped the superdelegates becoming a major source of controversy. Bloomberg has apparently already begun privately lobbying them to flip their allegiances, going so far as to try to poach the supporters of candidates like Joe Biden. The main question, though, is should superdelegates fall in line with whoever has won the most pledged delegates or not? Biden thinks they should just make their own minds up.
Are you going to fight for the nomination even if you are in second place in delegates?
Yes. I mean, look, the rules have been set. You don't change the rules in the middle of the game.
And at least so far, the superdelegates appear to be agreeing with him. Only 9 of the 93 superdelegates spoken to by the New York Times said that Sanders should become the nominee simply because he won the most delegates if he doesn't win a majority. Equally, only 38% of Democratic voters say that the candidate who wins the most delegates should get the nomination automatically, even if they don't win a majority. That's according to Fox, but YouGov says 36%, so that's pretty much the same. However, Bernie Sanders suggests that awarding the nomination to someone else could well be untenable.
The convention would have to explain to the American people, hey, candidate X, kind of got the most votes and won the most delegates in the primary process, but we're not going to give him or her the nomination. I think that would be a very divisive moment for the Democratic Party.
It'll be interesting to see what Sanders and Biden have to say if Joe Mentum continues and Biden takes a delegate lead. They might start seeing the virtues of each other's previous positions.
May well indeed. So, what will happen if nobody has a majority? And importantly, what will those superdelegates do? Let's ask one. Elaine K Mark is a member of the Democratic National Committee. She's a former senior advisor to Vice President Al Gore. These days, a leading expert on presidential primaries based at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Elaine, thanks for being with us on Planet America.
Thank you for having me.
So what is your view on this, Elaine? Should the candidate with the most delegates heading into the Democratic Convention in July automatically become the nominee, even if they're short of the 1,991 delegates for a majority?
Well, it depends on how short they are. There's no absolute answer to that. If a candidate heading into the convention is short of the magic number, he or she has a good 5 or 6 weeks to try and convince delegates, other delegates, to join them. And that person will have a very persuasive case. There's no doubt that if you're close to the nomination, the tendency within the party will be towards unity. And I think that whoever goes in with a substantial plurality will in fact be able to get to the magic number before the convention opens.
And Elaine, will that haggling be just for the superdelegates, or can the candidates go after delegates that are currently pledged to people like Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar, people that have dropped out?
Well, the first thing they will do is try to woo the delegates of people who have dropped out, and they will try to convince delegates from other candidates still in the race that they have the momentum, they have the biggest number, and that they should, for the sake of party unity, join with the winner. So there will be a lot of jockeying going on. They will simultaneously, of course, be interested in trying to get the endorsements of the superdelegates, but there's sort of 2 groups they will be courting, and they will be doing that simultaneously.
Now, I'm not looking for any names or anything, Elaine, but what kind of criteria will you personally be using to decide who you're going to support at the convention?
Well, the first one will be who can beat Trump, and I think most people who are members of the Democratic Party and have had a long history with the party will be most concerned with electability, and so that'll be the first criteria I will look at, and I suspect others will look at. I think also look at somebody's suitability to be president, their policies, how in sync with the Democratic Party their policies are. That will also be important. But as has been the case through much of this race, electability is going to be pretty important.
Do you think it's a problem that Mike Bloomberg has donated money to so many superdelegates?
I do think that's a problem. I wish he wouldn't do that. I think that that is not proper. It smacks of buying people. And yet, on the other hand, frankly, so many of these superdelegates are elected officials. In fact, everybody is elected who's a superdelegate. And therefore, I doubt that his giving them money is going to have much impact on their eventual decision. I can tell you that Tom Steyer in South Carolina spread around a lot of money to the Black community, to charities, to lots of people on his payroll from South Carolina, and he didn't win one delegate. So I'm not sure that spreading around money actually helps you win delegates.
And Elaine, do you think it'll weigh on the thinking of superdelegates that Bernie Sanders supporters, if he's denied the nomination, they may stay at home in November or vote for the Greens or vote for Trump instead?
Obviously, that's important. I think that equally important, however, will be whether or not Bernie Sanders and his supporters can come and talk in good faith with people from other campaigns and perhaps make some adjustments in their policy, make some kind of moves that would make him a more acceptable general election candidate. So while the threats are there, I think the flip side of that is, can Bernie Sanders make a coalition? Can he negotiate in good faith with other delegates and other members of the party?
Elaine K Mark, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
So Elaine K Mark thinks that if there is a clear delegate leader heading into the convention, then the party will unite behind them. But what if there isn't a clear leader? What if Bernie is still in front but still well short of a majority? Will the party close ranks to try and stop him? And if they do try and block Bernie, what might happen next? There have been at least 2 occasions when the Democratic Party tried to stop the leading contender from becoming their presidential nominee. 1972, a populist left-wing senator, George McGovern, excites younger voters and beats the Democratic Party's preferred candidates, including a former vice president. Sound familiar? This might too.
I think they're tired of a tax system that favors the powerful and penalizes the rest of us.
The party establishment tries to snatch the nomination away at the convention. They fail, but disunity in a disastrous campaign, which includes dumping his running mate, sees McGovern crash to a massive defeat. Then there was the more conservative outsider running against the corruption of Washington and rejecting the left wing of his party. A last-ditch movement to find a progressive alternative fails, and yet the outsider goes on to win the White House. That was Jimmy Carter in 1976.
It's time for us to get together, to correct our mistakes, to answer difficult questions, and to make our nation great.
George McGovern's 1972 presidential campaign provided the template for both how to win the nomination and how to lose the general election. He organised an enthusiastic grassroots army of young Americans who are against the Vietnam War. In 1971, the 26th Amendment had lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, and a lot of those new young voters liked the look of George McGovern.
And in the next administration, America will send forth once more the message of peace on earth.
Like Barack Obama in 2008, McGovern's youthful anti-war supporters overran his more established primary opponents, but McGovern was demonised as too liberal. He not only wanted to end the war, he wanted to slash military spending by more than 1/3 and provide a minimum income of $1,000 a year for all Americans. At the 1972 Democratic Convention, one potential running mate after another refused to share the ticket with him. A Stop McGovern push, headed by none other than Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter, tried to change the delegate rules, then fizzled out. McGovern had won.
My nomination is all the more precious in that it is the gift of the most open political process in all of our political history.
But the party remained divided and doomed to defeat. Some Democrats stayed at home, others flipped to Nixon.
President Nixon doesn't believe we should play games with our national security. He believes in a strong America.
4 years later, Jimmy Carter was running away with the Democratic nomination, winning 2/3 of the primaries and caucuses. In May 1976, the more liberal elements of the party started an anyone but Carter movement. He was too moderate, too much of an unknown, and they just didn't like the smiley and sanctimonious Southern governor. Progressive California Governor Jerry Brown and left-wing Idaho Senator Frank Church jumped into the race and performed well in a few final contests, but it was too late to force a contested convention.
The last time the Democratic Party came to New York City for our convention, that year we had 104 ballots before we chose a nominee. But this year I hope to abbreviate that just a little bit with your help.
And the Democratic Party did fall in behind Carter, who nominated Liberal Walter Mondale as his running mate, and together they patched things up and went on to win the White House. Lessons from history, of course, are highly subjective. You could look at McGovern and argue for the old axiom, disunity is death, or you could look at Carter and say elections are won on the middle ground. But the fact remains, both times the Democratic Party tried to overrule the will of primary voters, they did not succeed. And once again, we're right out of time. We will have the latest presidential campaign news on the Fireside Chat Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern on the ABC News channel.
And there's so much more on iView, Facebook and YouTube as well. Some of it's even about our show.
Bye-bye.
Hello? Guys, is there anyone out there? Hello? Hello? Hello?